Hi everyone, the Partial Prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk about the year 2024, this year of the 8th king. Okay, so let's do a little review. So I did a video about how 2020 was the year of the two witnesses, and I believe the two witnesses are Netanyahu and Donald Trump, at least that year anyway. And so what was really interesting is that we know that 2020 has to do with your vision. And so two eyes would connect to the two witnesses, okay? And so in Revelation 11, we read, "And I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth." So I was wondering too, so sometimes with prophecy, there's dual fulfillments or triple fulfillments. I mean, one of the things I really believe is that like the two witnesses ultimately connect to Israel and America, okay? Because I believe those are the two countries where God has his people. So Israel would be the country that represents his Jewish people, and then America is the country that represents the Christians. And so, so I didn't know if maybe like the two olive trees in this verse connected to Trump and Netanyahu, and maybe the two lampstands connect to Biden and Netanyahu, because I think we're seeing a kind of a repeat of history where there's two people representing like fulfilling this verse. I mean, so like when Trump and Netanyahu were around, so we had Trump was the president of the United States and Netanyahu was the prime minister of Israel. So we had two leaders coming out of the two countries. Well, we have the same thing happening right now where we have Biden and Netanyahu have been kind of sort of doing things together. More because Biden's kind of been pressuring Netanyahu during this war in Israel. And then what's interesting about the lampstands is that you get the number 7 from the lampstands, because the original lampstand in the temple had 7 branches, okay? And so I connect Biden. I believe that Biden is the 7th king. And so maybe the two lampstands now connect to Biden and Netanyahu, because it says that stand before the Lord of the earth. So what I think is what the deal is that we have these leaders, we have kind of these pairs of leaders that are doing stuff that affect Israel, okay, God's Jewish nation. Okay, and so we definitely saw that with Trump and Netanyahu because they were together working on those 6 peace deals. And then now we see Biden and Netanyahu. I mean, the first thing was with the Saudi deal where Netanyahu was really ready to jump on board before the war. And then now we've seen Biden just, like, it's funny because Biden really kind of ignored Netanyahu for just a lot at the beginning of Biden's presidency. He ignored him for a really long time, and then finally all of a sudden now he won't leave him alone. He won't shut up. He keeps calling him to pressure him about how to handle this war, okay? So that's what I got for that. Okay, and so if we read the whole verses. Okay, so it says, "And I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1260 days. So I connect the 1260 days to the 666 number that we find connected to the beast from the earth. Okay, it's also a connection to the 12/6 date in 2017 when Trump announced that he was going to be moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Okay. So sometimes I think numbers are symbolic, okay, that we read in the scriptures, okay. And so it says these two witnesses were clothed in sackcloth. And so we definitely saw that with both Trump and Netanyahu, that there was a lot of persecution by the people that didn't like him. And then it says, these are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire flows out of their mouth and devours their enemy. So, like Trump and Netanyahu speak like a dragon, they have fiery speech, okay? And then if anyone wants to harm him, he must be killed in this way. And so we definitely saw, especially with Trump, kind of the power that he had to use his fiery speech to go against his enemies. Okay, like if people spoke out against him, they would lose their position. Just like, I mean, just because Trump would say something, because he would speak out against his enemies, and then they would lose their position. So he had a lot of power even when he wasn't president, to cause people to lose power. And then it says, these have the power to shut up the sky so that rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying. So we definitely saw a time of drought while they, especially during 2020, we would consider that a time of drought. Okay, so we saw that they were able to kind of shut off the blessings from God, because they were doing things that were making God mad. Okay. And they have the power of the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every plague. So 2020 was definitely the year of plagues, as often as they desire. When they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. So what's very fascinating is that it's Revelation 11:7 that says, when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes out of the abyss will make war with them. Okay, so we saw that on November 7th was when they declared, what did I write? Biden started battling with Trump. That was when they declared Biden the winner of the election in America. Okay, so definitely interesting to see that connection with the verse number. But I think this verse too actually has a second fulfillment, because the beast coming out of the abyss and making war with them also definitely connects to Hamas. Okay, on October 7th of 2023. Okay, so that 7 would connect to that too. Okay. And then it's interesting that there's two cities. There's the names of two cities, Sodom and Egypt. Okay, so maybe Sodom connects to America and Egypt connects to Israel. And it says where also their Lord was crucified. And so, I mean, we know, like, physically Jesus was crucified in Israel. But I believe that during the time of Obama, that in a way Christianity was crucified. It was really kind of put to death during the time of Obama. Okay. And then it goes on, those from the people, tribes, tongues, and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they will send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. So it's interesting that we have that number there, Revelation 11:9. Okay. And it says, those from the people, tribes, tongues, and nations will look at their dead bodies through 3.5 days. So what one fulfillment for the 3.5 days is that I got the 1260 days after the deal of the century leads us to 7/10/2023. The next day in Israel, they started voting on the reasonableness clause in Israel and had a day of disruption. So we saw Netanyahu had lost power in Israel, and then the people on the left side of the aisle came in and were in control. But then Netanyahu was voted back into power. Okay, and so that what we saw was, it's like all of a sudden he had power again, and um, in Israel, and so he started, him and his administration, they wanted to get rid of this reasonableness clause, and so that happened, like on the 1261st day after the deal of the century. And then it says, and they will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in the tomb. What was interesting is that we saw protests in Israel over Netanyahu, especially once he got back in power. There was nonstop protests, and and then we saw in America. I mean, even though even when both these guys were out of power, we still heard so much about him. I mean, they had court cases in Israel over Netanyahu. They had court cases in America, or they at least talked about court cases going after Trump. And then, so I'll have to remember why I circled 10. Okay, and those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they will send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. So what I believe is that this verse is moving into the time of Biden. Okay, and so when Biden was in power, it was a time of celebration for the people on the left. I mean, because if you really remember, what happened is that they had a lot of power during the time of Obama, and then Trump came in and they lost that power, and the people on the left were miserable during the time of Trump. So then when Trump lost his power, the left just had a great time and celebrated. And then when you talk about sending gifts to one another, we definitely saw Biden was spending America's money for all their agenda on the left. Okay. And so I connect them to Belshazzar in the book of Daniel, where they're drinking wine. So there's this ruler who just has a banquet drinking wine, and he's drinking wine out of the vessels from the temple. Okay. And so what we have is Biden spending the money of the country that God considers his. Okay. And so he's making God angry. Okay. And then so let's see, if this January 20th is 11/10 on the Hebrew calendar, 1335 days after May 26, 2020, which was the start of the George Floyd rioting, and 3 years after Biden's inauguration. So we're going to talk about this a little later. But so maybe I connect the 10 number to the 11/10. Okay. So even though right now it doesn't make sense to me, so sorry about that. So yeah, I mean, I guess that is Revelation 11:10. And so I connect that to the 11:10 on the Hebrew calendar. Okay. I mean, because then that would be a second fulfillment, because then it's like we switch to Trump and his followers rejoicing and celebrating. Okay. So maybe that's what I'm connecting there. Okay. And so I saw with these verses, so the first fulfillment, if you're talking about Netanyahu, so it says after the 3.5 days, so after 1260 days from the deal of the century, quote unquote, Netanyahu got his reasonableness clause voted in. I think they have since overturned it. And then like the Supreme Court or whatever. And then it says, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were watching them. So I'm not sure why I highlighted those. Okay, and they heard a loud voice from heaven. Okay, so that would be so the watching, I highlighted the watching, so that kind of connects to the two witnesses. Like you want to keep an eye out for when it mentions anything to do with the eyes, looking, watching. Um, um, and so it says they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." Then they went up to heaven in the cloud, and their enemies watched them. So I was thinking this could connect to the voice from heaven would be Biden with the Saudi Arabia deal on the 1290th day, saying, okay, he's saying, "Come up here." He was like saying to Netanyahu in Israel, "Come join us in this peace deal." Okay. So when we read about heaven, there's a connection to Israel. So the Saudi Arabia deal is this deal that Biden was trying to get together with Saudi Arabia and Israel. Okay, a peace deal, or really it's a continuation of the Abrahamic Accords that Trump and Netanyahu did. Okay. Then it says they went up to heaven in the cloud. So a lot of times when I see cloud, I think of delusional influence. Okay. And then it says their enemies watch them. So the enemies of Israel were really angry about this Saudi deal. Okay. They did not want Saudi to normalize relations with Israel. Okay. And so it could have actually been a part of what prompted Hamas to attack earlier. Okay. Because I mean, I don't know how much is true, but what's kind of been said is that they believe there was actually a plan for a bigger attack against Israel. Like everyone joining together, like maybe Hamas and Hezbollah and some of the other groups all attacking Israel on the same day. But in a way, it's kind of by the grace of God that Hamas was I mean, it's still not good. It's still not a good situation, but that Hamas was prompted to do it earlier. And, um, probably maybe because they wanted the glory for themselves. So, so that's what we saw. And so then it says in that hour, there was a great earthquake. And so that could connect to the war in Israel on October 7, 2023. And and then I'm not sure how the rest of the verse, how we get that kind of fulfilled in this situation. I mean, a tenth of the city, I connect the tenth to the 10 people with the 10 spies in Israel way back in the Torah that didn't have faith, so that could be that they fell when this war started. So that is kind of my ideas on the first fulfillment. I was going to say something else about that, but now I can't think of it. So then the second fulfillment I have with Trump. Okay. So like we saw the first fulfillment when the war started in Israel. So I'm actually thinking in some of these verses, like a good example is in Daniel, where we read about the 70th week, and it has this long list of things that are going to happen on the 70th week. Like it says, put an end to sin. And I forget the rest of the list, but it's a long list. And we've seen like a 70th week, like we saw Trump and Netanyahu lost their power 70th weeks after the quote unquote deal of the century. But not everything in that verse was fulfilled. And so I think what may be possible with prophecy is that we get a list in prophecy, and some of the items are fulfilled in the first fulfillment, and then other items are fulfilled in the second fulfillment, and maybe there's a final fulfillment that ultimately fulfills the whole verse. Okay. So then with the second fulfillment of Revelation 11:11, it says, after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were watching them. Okay. So what I have is for the 3.5 days, I have, what if it's after 3.5 months of war in Israel leads us to January 20th, and January 21st is 11/11 on the Hebrew calendar. So what if the 3.5 days are actually leading us to this weekend, the January 20th and the 21st? And then it says the breath of life from God came into them. That would be Trump and his followers, and they stood on their feet. And so that connects to the feet of Daniel's statue, which is like the final phase in the prophetic, in the prophecy. Okay, it's like we move through the statue. We had the arms, and we had the belly, and we had the legs, and then the final, time frame would be the feet. Okay, and so what I believe is that Trump ushers in the time of the feet with his followers. Okay, and then it says, great fear fell upon those who were watching them. There's the watching connecting to the two witnesses. And then it says they heard a loud voice from heaven. So this time it's Trump saying, come up here. Okay. And then they went up to heaven in the clouds. So definitely, I mean, we already see that delusional influence on Trump's followers. Okay. And their enemies watched them. And in that hour, so this kind of makes more sense here. It says in that hour would connect to the hour of judgment. There was a great earthquake. So America is connected to the earth in prophecy. Israel's connected to heaven. And so it's interesting because we had the war in Israel, and then now we're going to see a war get started in America. The civil war is what I believe. And it says a tenth, and so that connects to the 10 spies with unbelief of the city fell. So that would be the Trump followers. They don't have belief that God can help us overcome the giants. And so they're going to be taking matters into their own hand and go after Biden's people. And then it says 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake. Well, number 7 would connect to Biden's followers. Okay. And then the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. That could be Jesus's followers. And then I wrote too, a third fulfillment could be Messiah. That the loud voice from heaven saying, come up here, could be Messiah. And then they say, okay, this time when they went up to heaven in the cloud, I put that they were hidden by the cloud. So Jesus's followers are going to be hidden by the cloud while this civil war is going on in America. Okay. That we're put into like a Sukkot booth, or, kind of like the time of the Passover, that when death came, it passed over the Israelites. And death couldn't see them. Or a really good example is during the time of when they went after Lot in Sodom, they couldn't find the door. Okay, they were hidden. The door was like hidden from their sight. Okay. And then it says, and their enemies watched them. And so I connect that to, he prepares a table before my enemies. Okay. So that's what I got for that. And so talking about the 60 days of the two witnesses. Okay, it's in Revelation 12, it says, and she gave birth to a son, a male, who is to rule all the nations with the rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. So I believe that the male child that was born is Trump, okay, who rules with the rod of iron. Okay, so we had Obama was president, and then we had Trump came in, and he really, really ruled with iron. Just was a tough guy. Okay, just overthrowing a bunch of stuff that Obama had done. Okay, which is why his followers are attracted to him, because they felt oppressed during the time of Obama, and they see Trump willing to do things and say things that they might not even have the courage themselves to say. So they saw Trump willing to go against the people on the left. And, like I said, because they didn't really have faith in God, that God had a plan, I mean, it says in God's word that, in the last days, we're gonna see bad people rise up, and does it mean that God's out of control? That God no longer has control on this earth? No, this is what was prophesied. And so, as followers and believers of God and Jesus, we don't need to be afraid when we see this stuff happening. And so, we don't have to take matters into our own hands. We don't have to follow this crazy guy, Trump. We can just wait and see for God's, wait for God's plan to, happen, for God to, and I really think it's because we're in the last days, and the way God's going to fix it is he's going to send the Messiah. Okay. I mean, if times weren't bad, what do we need the Messiah for? I mean, that's why Jesus is coming to fix all these problems that we see in the world. And so what's interesting with the 1260 days is it connects to this verse, Revelation 12:6. Okay. And like I said, that connects to the date that Trump said he was going to move the embassy. He made his announcement about moving the embassy to Jerusalem. So that's why I believe this male child who's going to rule with a rod of iron is Trump. And then a connection with the woman in the wilderness. We saw the Israelites wandered in the wilderness with Moses and Aaron. And so, so kind of during the time of Trump and Netanyahu, they would be a picture of Moses and Aaron. But then, I think we're still in the wilderness too, and they're, I do believe that, maybe now Biden and Netanyahu are fulfilling some of the things that Moses and Aaron did in the wilderness. Okay, so 1260 connects to 12:6. So here's the little snippet from Wikipedia, where it says on December 6, 2017, U.S. President Donald Trump announced the United States recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and ordered the planning of the relocation of the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And a lot of the followers of Trump just think the fact that he moved the embassy to Jerusalem was the greatest thing in the, since sliced bread. And it's one of the things that they, really, if you listen to the followers of Trump, they really worship him as like a messianic figure or as someone called from God. And they really have been deceived by these, quote unquote signs that Trump did, for the longest time they were running around saying that Trump created peace in the Middle East, which he didn't, with these quote unquote peace deals that he did. And now if you talk to him, they would probably say, well, Trump created peace in the Middle East and then Biden messed it up, so, so people are just delusional. Okay. And God said in the last days, there's going to be these false messiahs and false Christ. Okay. And don't be deceived. And I believe so many people are being deceived by either going after Trump or going after Biden. Okay. There's a few others too that aren't as well known that people kind of follow. But Trump and Biden definitely get the most press of everyone. So like I said, 2020 was the year of the quote unquote peace deals. Okay. Starting with on January 28th was the deal of the century, quote unquote. And then these 6 peace deals with on September 15th was the peace deal signings in Washington. That was Netanyahu who actually came out and signed these things. And so I wanted to make sure you notice there's 6 of these peace deals. Okay. Very important. Okay. And then, so one of the questions I ask is, was there peace in Israel because of these peace, quote unquote, peace deals? Was there peace in God with God? So it's actually kind of interesting that I said peace in Israel, because this list here actually is a list of the things that happened. Um, some of the judgment that came to America because of these peace deals. Okay. Um, but we saw, when you talk about peace with God, we saw that 7 weeks after the deal of the century was the start of the coronavirus shutdown. Okay. Um, so you want to pay attention to things like that to see how God feels about things. Okay. And then 119 to 120 days after the deal of the century was when they started the George Floyd riots. Okay. Um, so definitely kind of interesting. So we read about the two. Okay, so in Zechariah we read, "Then I said to him, what are these two olive trees on the right of the lampstand and on its left? And I answered the second time and said to him, what are the two olive branches which are beside the two golden pipes, which empty the golden oil from themselves? So he answered me, saying, do you not know what these are? And I said, no, my Lord. Then he said, these are the two anointed ones who are standing by the Lord of the whole earth. Okay, so I circled the second time, okay, because we had Trump and Netanyahu fulfilling these verses, back in 2020. But then, like I said, I think there's a second fulfillment. And what's interesting is that we read about the two olive trees being on the right of the lampstand and on the left. And what's very interesting about Netanyahu and Biden is that Netanyahu stands on the right politically and Biden stands on the left politically. Okay. And so the second fulfillment is someone who's going to be on the right politically and someone who's going to be on the left politically. And so that's where I think we are on the prophetical timeline. And then when I read about the fact that they are these two golden pipes emptying the golden oil, it's like they're draining the riches from Israel to feed themselves. Okay, so we've seen, we definitely saw that with Netanyahu, where he was, that's why he got on board with Trump's quote unquote peace deals. He was trying to make a name for himself, and then now he's doing the same thing with Biden, and then Biden is definitely trying to make a name for himself. Okay, so they're messing with Israel just so they can make a name for themselves. And God is not happy with that type of behavior. So we shouldn't be surprised if we see judgment coming in the near future for them. And then, okay, so then in Genesis 48, we read, Joseph said to his father, they are my sons who God has given me here. So this was when Joseph brought his two sons to Jacob to be blessed. I don't know if Jacob was on his deathbed, or I don't think he was on his deathbed, but I think it was near the end of Jacob's life. So, and really what happened is that Jacob accepted Joseph's two sons and put him on the same level as his other 12 sons. Okay. So it's almost like he had 13 sons. Okay. So then it said, Joseph said to his father, they are my sons whom God has given me here. That would be in Egypt. So he said, bring them to me, please. So Jacob said, bring them to me, please, that I may bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were so dim from age that he could not see. Then Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on the hand of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. Okay, so so I was focusing on the fact that it talks about the eyes of Israel being dim from age so that he could not see. Okay, so that connects to the two witnesses. And this story is kind of a very fascinating story, because at some point, so the firstborn ends up being um, switched with the secondborn. Okay, and that connects to, we see a similar thing happening with Esau and Jacob. Okay, that Jacob ends up getting the birthright and the blessing. Okay, and so there's a picture of this reversal of fortunes. And then really what it is a picture of the judgment of the firstborn. Okay, so, right now we see Netanyahu and Biden in power. Okay, but at some point, God brings judgment. Okay, um, and the fortunes get reversed. So God's people that are now kind of oppressed and not in control, all of a sudden, will be blessed by God when He comes to bring judgment on the people that are currently in the place of the firstborn and in power. Okay. So then this is so this is Daniel's statue, and I'm still kind of trying to work out the bottom of it, like the legs and the feet. Okay. So I mean, I was wondering if during the time of Trump that we had the BLM riots happening, started in 2020 during the time of Trump, and so maybe like Trump would be the leg of iron on the right, and the BLM rioters would be the leg of iron on the left. And then, like I said, we moved down to the feet. And so during the time of Joe Biden, he was having to deal with the MAGA people. Okay. But then, and then we're definitely going to see, I mean, I think January 6th was a foreshadow of what's to come. Okay. That really might have been a warning to God of what's going to come. Okay. And so hang in there. So we'll see what happens. Okay. And so I have the first king starting with Ronald Reagan, and that was because 1983 was 40 years ago. Okay. And then so Trump would be the sixth king, Biden was the seventh king. And so we read about the eighth king. So we read about a king, one of the previous seven kings comes back. Okay. In Revelation 17:11 it says, the beast which was and is not is himself also an eighth, and is of the seven, and he goes to destruction. Okay. I mean, it's possible that Obama comes back, but I really doubt it. Okay, because I really think Biden, the reason why God had Biden come back to power is, see, God won't bring judgment until there's the fulfillment, the fullness of their sins. Okay, and so even though Obama with Biden as his vice president did a lot of bad stuff, we didn't see the fullness of their sins. Okay, enough for God to bring judgment. Okay, I mean, God brought some judgment because they, lost power for a time while Trump came. But He allowed them to come back so they could fill up their sin to the fullest, and that's what we're seeing right now. I mean, just all this stuff that Biden's been doing. So that's why I'm not really looking for Obama coming back, because I think it's really kind of happened in Biden's presidency. Okay. But then we have the same thing with Trump, that Trump did a lot of stuff when he was president, but we haven't seen the fullness of his sin. Okay. And I mean, this is why the Bible says don't go either right or left. Okay. There's sinners on both sides of the aisle. Okay. You want to follow Jesus. So, anyways, but what we read about this eighth king is that he goes to destruction. He does destruction, and so I think that Trump and his followers are going to come and bring destruction to Joe Biden and his followers. Okay, that God's going to use them. I mean, a lot of times God uses His enemies to bring judgment. Okay, and so I believe that God's going to use Trump and his followers to bring judgment on Biden when his sin is full, which I really think is now, and we'll talk about this a little later in the video. And so it talks about the one remaining a little while, and I think that's Biden because I think he only gets 3 years, is what I'm thinking. I don't think we're going to see his full presidency. I don't think we're going to see 4 years of Biden. I mean, I could be wrong. And then I'll have to do another video and recount and recalculate everything. In Daniel 2, we read about the third kingdom of bronze. Okay, so I connect bronze to Obama and Biden because it says the third kingdom of bronze will rule over all the earth. I mean, Obama really did have power over the earth, like the whole world. Okay, because he was really working with. There was a lot of other leaders that were really similar to Obama politically, and so they were all kind of working together. To do climate change was one of the things they were doing. They had the Iran deal. I don't really know what else was going on. I mean, those are the important things that I kind of remember. So he ruled all over the earth or world. And then we read about a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So I connect that to Trump. And so then it says, so then we read about the feet being partly of iron and partly of clay. So iron could connect to Trump's followers. The clay, I talked about this before. The clay could be called miry clay. So it's wet clay, okay? And so the wet part of the clay could connect to Biden's followers because I believe Biden is the beast from the sea. And then we definitely know that clay connects to God's followers, okay? And then so it's the feet kind of connect three groups, or is a picture of three groups, really. Okay, so it says, in that you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. Okay, as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. Okay, and it says, and in that you saw the iron mixed with the common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Okay. So it talks about, okay, the iron. Okay, it says, and in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another, but they will not adhere to one another. Okay, even as iron does not combine with pottery. So we saw during the time of Biden that we definitely had Trump's followers didn't get on board with the Biden presidency. Okay, so they weren't adhering to one another. But then it goes on to say, even as iron does not combine with pottery. So that could be a picture of, even as the Trump followers don't combine with the Jesus followers. Okay. Because pottery could definitely connect to Jesus's followers. Okay. And so that would be a picture of, the wheat and the tares. Okay. God's followers are the wheat and Trump's followers are the tares. Okay. So God repeats a lot of these pictures throughout Scripture. Okay. So that finishes talking about 2020, even though I kind of moved forward to talking about today. But what I really believed is that in 2021 was the year of the seventh king. So that was, when we started seeing Biden, the start of his presidency. Okay. On 11/7/20, he was declared the winner. His on January 7th in 2021 was his electoral college vote. And so we see that number 7 in those dates. Okay, so year of the seventh king. 21 can be parsed out to 777, 7 plus 7 plus 7. What's really interesting about January 7th is that the Electoral College vote was supposed to happen on January 6th. I mean, this is when prophecy is so fascinating that if we didn't have the January 6th riots happen, then the Electoral College vote would have happened on January 6th. Okay. So it was fascinating that because that happened, the vote was pushed to be January 7th. Okay. So that's fascinating when you think about Biden being the seventh king. Okay. What's interesting about the number 21 is that there's two big holidays on the Jewish calendar, Passover and Sukkot, that go from the 15th of the month on the Hebrew calendar to the 21st. And so the 21st is the seventh day of the holidays. Okay, so we see 21 connected to day 7. Okay. We read about Lamech in Genesis 5. And it says all the days of Lamech were 777 years and he died. Okay. So I'm wondering if there's a connection. So we see 777 kind of hidden in scripture in various ways. And what I'm really wondering is if that connects to the 3 years of Biden. Okay, 777. Okay. And then Lamech dies. And so are we going to see the end of Biden because he's had his 3 years? Okay. In Daniel 10, we read about, okay, so Daniel says, okay, let me think. The person who's talking in these verses is, so the angel Gabriel comes and he says, the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia. Okay, so we read about 21 days in Daniel 10. So actually, Daniel is mourning for 3 weeks. Okay, but then, I mean, it connects to the, it's also 3 weeks or 21 days. Okay. And so I wonder if that connects to the 3 years of Biden. Like, Daniel would be a picture of God's people who are in mourning during the 3 years of Biden's presidency. Okay. And it says, the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Then Michael came to help me. Okay. Well, we already saw fulfillment of that with Netanyahu returning to power in Israel. The left had kind of come in and they were doing their messy stuff that they do, and then they voted in Netanyahu. Okay. But then I think we're going to see a fulfillment of, Trump's going to come and help, quote unquote, and then definitely a third fulfillment with Messiah. He's going to come and help. Okay. Because it says, I was left there with the kings of Persia. Okay, so what if that's a picture of the presidents in America? Okay, or Biden's administration. So, so that connects to like Cyrus the Persian. Okay, we had Darius the Mede and then Cyrus the Persian, different rulers during the time of Daniel. And so what we saw with Biden is that he and his administration is pushing Israel during this war and for a 2-state solution. So that could be a picture, could be a fulfillment of the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstanding me for 21 days. So Biden pushing his agenda onto Israel for the 3 years that he was president. So that's that. And then there's, in Daniel 10, so what's very interesting about Daniel 10, so like I said, Daniel was mourning for 3 entire weeks, okay? He said, I did not eat any tasty food, nor did meat or wine enter my mouth, nor did I use any ointment at all until the entire 3 weeks were completed. And so remember I talked about that Biden and his followers were like partying, and so it's like God's people were not partying during the time of Biden. Okay, we were mourning. Okay, we were in mourning. Okay, but also Trump's followers would have been in mourning during this time too, during the time of Biden. And then it's interesting because then Daniel 10 goes on to say, on the 24th day of the first month, while I was by the bank of the great river that is the Tigris, I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, there was a certain man dressed in linen, whose waist was girded with pure gold of Uphaz. So Daniel then has a messianic encounter, okay, and after he had been mourning for 3 weeks, okay. So I think there could be two fulfillments of this messianic encounter. One obviously is Jesus, but two is the like a false messianic encounter with Trump, okay? Because it talks about Daniel says, I lifted my eyes and looked, okay? And what's interesting is that happened on the 24th day of the first month. So is it possible that that is a prophetic shadow of the first month of 2024? Okay, that's what I'm wondering, okay? So keep that in mind, okay? And then because in Daniel 10, the angel Gabriel, who's saying all this stuff about the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstanding me for 21 days, he says, the next verse goes on to say, now I have come to give you an understanding of what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision pertains to the days yet future. So the angel says this is a picture of what's going to happen in the last days. So that's why we really want to pay attention to Daniel 10 and see how it might be fulfilled in our day. Okay, if we are in the last days, which I really believe we are. Okay, so that's why we want to look at this chapter carefully. And then let's see. Okay, so then I had another verse. Okay, so then I have Genesis 4, which, so this is kind of interesting because Lamech, I mean, this might be a different Lamech than the one who died at 777 years. He says to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech, give heed to my speech, for I've killed a man for wounding me and a boy for striking me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77fold. So we see kind of 3 sevens listed there. Okay. And so is that a hidden picture of that 777? But I also had kind of been looking at this because you know how, after Trump did the deal of the century, we got the shutdown for COVID 7 weeks afterwards. So God brought judgment for Trump's deal of the century in 7 weeks. Okay. And so I'm wondering if this picture of Lamech, his judgment comes a little bit later. Okay, like 77. And so I thought I had found a fulfillment of the 77, but then nothing happened then, and so it didn't work out. But it's possible that we'll see something that connects the 77 when God finally does bring judgment to Biden. And then, okay, so then moving on to 2022, what I'm kind of wondering is if you take that 20 that connects to like the 2020, and then, so the 22, remember how the holidays go to the 21st is the 7th day. The 22nd day on the Hebrew calendar would be the 8th day of the holiday, okay? So what I'm wondering is if 2022 is a year of a glimpse of the 6th king who becomes the 8th king. Because if you look at 2022 and you add 2 plus 2 plus 2, you get 6, okay? But then you have that 22, which connects to the 8th day of the holidays, okay? And the reason why I thought that, like, obviously, hindsight's always 2020, ha ha ha. It's a lot easier to kind of look back at 2022 now that it's been over for a while and go, what was God kind of doing during that year? And some of the things that really stood out that year was the January 6th commission. Okay. And so that happened from June 9th to December 22nd. Okay, that was when they did their final report. Okay, so I thought that was an interesting date because you see two 22s there. Okay. Um, and then, so then I wrote July 21st was the 8th, January 6th hearing. Okay, they put that on prime time. Okay, on July 21st. What was interesting about that date is that Biden had COVID on that date. Okay. So I'm kind of jumping from talking to Trump to talking about Biden. On July 14, 2022, he signed a paper with Lapid, who was the current prime minister of Israel at the time. Lapid is on the left politically. Okay. So they kind of had this weird thing in between the two different times Netanyahu was prime minister, where there was a couple different people that fulfilled the position of prime minister during that time. Okay. So on July 14, 2022, so we see the 77 number in July 14th. Biden signed this paper with Lapid, and it really talks about, basically it was Biden making, like, saying he was committed to this two-state solution. It says a bunch of things, but it definitely says two-state solution in there. Okay. So what was fascinating was that exactly 7 days later, Biden had COVID on July 21st. Okay. And so I'm kind of wondering if so it was interesting that the 8th January 6th hearing happened on that same date. Okay. And so we see that number 8 there. Okay. And so I kind of wonder if God was trying to give Biden a sign saying judgment is coming and it's going to involve the number 8. Okay. And it has to do with these January 6th hearings. Okay. And so remember I said that I think January 6th might be a picture of what is to come. Okay. That Trump's people aren't done. Like, they're going to come back and do like January 6th, but it's going to be even bigger. It's going to be more final. Okay. And it's going to be how God brings judgment to Biden and his followers. Okay. So then also in 22 connected to Trump, we saw on 8/8/2022 was the Mar-a-Lago warrant. That's where 11 sets of classified information was seized. Okay. So we see that 8. We see 8 number listed twice there. 8/8. You could almost say 3 if you take the 22. It's like 8/8/8. Okay. I think, it was God showing us that the lawless one was being revealed. Okay. Definitely the January 6th commission was revealing the lawless one. Okay. If you don't think Trump is that bad, then you should commit yourself to watching these January 6th commission hearings because it just shows you the mind of Trump. Okay. I thought they were very well done. And so, we don't want to be deceived. God warns us about being deceived in the last days. Okay. And so, we need to be willing to listen to people on the other side of the aisle from us, because God says in his word, like, I think this is a proverb where it says one person will speak and this is a paraphrase. One person will speak and it sounds good until we hear the second person. Okay. And so if we're only listening to people on the same side of the aisle as us, we're not going to hear, like, sometimes people on the other side of the aisle will give us a balance to what we're hearing. Although kind of in these last days, there's so much like hyperbole and exaggeration and so it's almost like we need to listen to the two sides of the aisle, and then recognize that the truth is somewhere in the middle. So, um, but we shouldn't be afraid of hearing what other people have to say. Um, we really need to have a lot of discernment in this time. Okay. Um, the other thing that happened in 2022 was on 11/18 was when Jack Smith was appointed special counsel, um, for Trump's document. I think it's both the document issue and um, the January 6th thing. Um, and I mean, if you don't see that Trump did a bad thing by stealing these documents from Washington, then I don't know what to say to you. I mean, he's the lawless one. This was bad. Any other person would have been in jail. I mean, there was actually, and I don't know what year that was, if that was 2022, if that was happening around the same time, there was a guy who actually took some of the top secret information that he got and put it on a website, like a gaming site. That guy was like thrown in jail and, got a trial like really quick. And here we are, like how many years later after Trump, you know, committed this crime, nothing is going, he still has yet to pay the piper. And, so, um, um, so I think it's important to kind of um, keep all this stuff in mind. I mean, he's the lawless one. You don't want to follow him, okay? Um, he is not going to fix the world's problems, okay? Um, um, anyways, so then the other thing that was really fascinating about 2022 was on June 24th, 2022 was when Roe v. Wade was overturned, okay? So, that was very interesting. And it's kind of like contributed to kind of this whole um, like Civil War type atmosphere in America. Okay, because we definitely have the people that want to be able to kill their babies just in a tizzy because Roe v. Wade got overturned. Okay, and so if you look at that date, June 24th, we have 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6, and then 2022 is another 6. So how many 6s is that? I think it's 6 6s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 6s. Okay, so definitely interesting. I mean, we know it's because of who Trump appointed to the Supreme Court that Roe v. Wade was able to get overturned. Okay. So then the list of what so Biden started his anti-Israel behavior in 2022. Okay. So maybe another lawless one being revealed in 2022. Okay. So like I said, on July 14th was when he signed the paper with Lapid. October 27th was the maritime agreement was signed in Israel. So Biden's administration was part of this maritime, behind this maritime agreement that ended up giving away some of Israel's sea land, okay, like valuable sea land, okay. And then December 13th was when Biden signed the quote unquote Respect for Marriage Act, which is anything but what it calls itself. It's very anti-marriage, very anti-marriage the way God has set it up, okay. And then what was interesting in 2022 is that we saw the return of Netanyahu. Okay, so they actually voted. So the maritime agreement happened on October 27th. So exactly 7 days later, Lapid was conceding to Netanyahu. But then there was something about December 1st was when Netanyahu finally got his coalition together or whatever. And to me, that date, 12/1, is interesting because it connects to Daniel 12:1. Okay, the return of Netanyahu. So that's why I put that date instead of like November, when they had the election in Israel. So, but I mean, the start of his return started in November. So, And it's interesting when you see, Lapid got judgment really fast. He was out of power within 7 days. Okay. Um, with this maritime agreement. And so sometimes God brings fast judgment, but then other times it takes a while, and it really has to do with God's will and plan and purposes. Because he's allowing Biden to remain until God's purposes are fulfilled for this time frame. Then 2023 was what I consider the third year of the seventh king. Okay, and so if you add 2 plus 2 plus 3, you get 7. Okay, what's interesting is the Hebrew year was kind of matching um, the the um, the Gregorian years. Okay, we had 5783 adds up to 23. Okay, so that was matching like 2023. But then around September, with the Jewish New Year, we switched to 5784, which adds up to 24. So kind of like the Jewish New Year kind of gives us a preview of what's coming. Then, okay, so August 9th, 2023 was 1290 days after the deal of the century. Okay, that was when the Wall Street Journal had an article about Biden and the Saudi quote unquote peace deal, which was fascinating about that. It was Obama's birthday on the Hebrew calendar. So it's very interesting. So what is God trying to say with that? So that's what happened in 2023. And so I have the 6 peace deals with Trump. I mean, for a while now, I was thinking maybe Biden's Saudi deal would be like the 7th peace deal, and then we'd consider the the fullness of sins. But then Biden's been doing all this other stuff with Israel since during the war, that I think we can get a 7, outside of, not including Trump's 6 peace deals. Okay. But what was interesting for August 9th with the Saudi deal was on August 8th was that terrible Maui fire in Hawaii. August 20th was Hurricane Hillary. Kind of interesting that it was called that. August 30th was Hurricane Idalia. And so, could definitely be considered judgment for Biden, and his Saudi deal. So like the Maui fire was like, even, before the Saudi deal was announced in the Wall Street Journal. But so the interesting too, the date of the Maui fire was 8/8, again, like a year after the Mar-a-Lago warrant. Okay. So definitely interesting. And then what we had is October 7th, 2023 was when Hamas invaded Israel. So like I said, we got that number 7 there. What was interesting too is that was Putin's 71st birthday. Okay. So some people think Hamas might have done this as a birthday present for Putin. So I'm not really sure. But it's interesting how a lot of things happen on people's birthdays. Then, okay, so what I'm wondering is we read a lot about times, and half a time in the scriptures, okay? And so I'm wondering if that time frame connects to the 3.5 months of the war, okay? Because in Daniel 7, we read about, I think this might be the little horn, not really sure. But okay, so these are the 3 groups of verses where we read about times, and half the time, okay? So, I think I might have, yeah. Okay, so I have a slide for each of these. Okay, so in Daniel 7, it says, okay, the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head and the other horn which came up. So maybe like the 10 horns were first the George Floyd rioters, okay, and then the other horn that came up could be Biden, okay, that came up out of the left, okay, because the 10 horns, the George Floyd rioters were given power during the time of Trump. And then Biden came and God allowed him to overcome Trump. Okay. And then it says, before which 3 of them fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth, uttering great boast, and which was larger in appearance than his associates. Like the 3 that fell, I kind of connect to the 3 groups of followers for Trump. And I did that in a previous video, and I don't remember now. It was like QAnon, and there was another group, maybe 2 other groups. Okay. Like some white supremacist group might be included in there. And them falling could actually connect, the 3 falling could connect to what happened on January 6th. Okay. So then it says, I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed. So what we see is like Biden in a way waging war with Israel, okay, until Jesus comes, okay. And then it says the 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms. So like what I think is that Biden is the little horn, and the 4th beast is Trump's kingdom. So let's see. The 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth and tread it down and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise. Okay, so I might be seeing like double fulfillment. Like first the 10 horns were connected to the BLM protesters that popped up during the time of Trump. And then it says another will arise after them, that is Biden being voted in. And he will be different from the previous ones and subdue 3 kings. Oh, but I actually wrote Biden subdues Netanyahu, Halevi, who's the IDF leader, and Gallant, the defense minister. So, I mean, 2 fulfillments, like he subdues 3 of them, you know, the 3 groups in, you know, that were involved in January 6th. And then now during the time of the Israel war, Biden is subduing these 3 leaders in Israel. And it says he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One and intend to make alterations in times and law. You know, so I highlighted wear down. Okay, he's wearing down the people in Israel to force them to do what he wants them to do with this war. Okay, and then it's, okay, and so he will intend to make alterations in times and in law. Biden wants to do a 2-state solution and change how the war is fought. Okay, he wants to make alterations in, you know, what's happening with the state of Israel. I mean, he wants a 2-state solution. And then it says they will be given into his hand for 10 times and half a time. So I'm wondering if that connects to the 3.5 times of the war, 3.5 months of the war. But the court will sit for judgment, and his dominion will be taken away, annihilated, and destroyed forever. So the destroyer will come and take away his dominion. So that's that verse, those verses. In Daniel 12, so then here's Daniel 12:1, where it says, at that time Michael, the great prince who stands over the sons of your people, will arise. So I think that's Netanyahu on 12:1-22. And there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And so we saw that ever since Netanyahu got into power, there's been weeks and weeks of protesting in Israel. Then they moved into the war with Hamas. And actually, there was some unity in Israel at the beginning of the war, but now it's kind of going back to the division, and people are protesting Netanyahu's government. Okay, but then it goes on to say, but as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. Many will go back and forth, so maybe back and forth could be back and forth in war, which connects to the raven that goes back and forth. And then it says, knowledge will increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, 2 others are standing, one on this bank of the river and the other on this bank. So we have that left and right picture again, okay? And so there's a man dressed in linen who's above the waters of the river, and he raises his right hand and his left hand and swears by him who lives forever that it will be for a time, and half a time. And as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. Okay. So, so I mean, I think we've already seen this. We've seen Biden shattering the power in Israel, because they have actually, um, they sent the reservist home. They in Israel, um, and they said they're going to call him back. Like, I think they want to call him back for the war with Hezbollah up in the north, and maybe they're hoping that nobody will give them a hard time about fighting that war. Um, but they went to a different phase in fighting in Gaza, and it's less intense, a less intense phase. Like, seriously, Israel can't do what it needs to do in Gaza because of all the pressure that they're getting from Biden and his administration. Okay, so we might already be at that time frame where they have shattered the power of the holy people, that they've just kind of given up in Israel, and maybe have said, okay, let's just go focus on Hezbollah and see if they'll leave us alone. And then, so then when that happens, it says all these will be completed, all these events will be completed. Okay. We see the verse that talks about the 1290 days, which led us to the Saudi deal. Okay. Then the other time we see time, times, and half a time, it says the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God so that she would be nourished for 1,260 days. So that was Revelation 12:6. And like I said, that was the time of Trump. But then it says, when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male. So that would be Biden persecuting the Trump followers. Okay. But it says the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for time, times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Does that connect to the time of Israel's war, the 3.5 months? But I also kind of wonder if the time, times, and half time could connect to the 3 years of Biden. And then the half a time is when the dividing of time, the Civil War in America. I mean, it could kind of connect to both. Okay. And if you look at it, the time and the times, it's like Biden didn't start his stuff against Israel until 2022. Okay. So, like, we saw in 2022 and 2023, Biden doing all this stuff against Israel. Okay. So that would be the times. Okay. And then, maybe the half a month, could be this beginning in January, the first 2 weeks in January. So that's what we got there. So then I made a list of Biden's administrations, the action of his administration during the war. Okay, in October 1st, we saw, right when the war started, it was like day 12 of the war, Biden was flying to Israel to discuss the humanitarian needs of the civilians in Gaza. Okay, so that was on 10/18/23. Really, it was on day 1360 after the deal of the century. Okay, so then in November, there was a phone call to Netanyahu from Biden pushing the ceasefire or the pauses. That happened on 11/6/23. That was day 31 of the war, which was actually 10 days after the ground invasion. I mean, they had just gotten started in Gaza, and Biden was on the phone call trying to put a pause or a ceasefire to the fighting in Gaza. I mean, who does that? And, how can you deal with evil if you can't fight against them? And then, so we saw that Israel agreed, so they gave in. Israel agreed to the 4-hour pauses in fighting, which actually happened on the 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht, which was November 9th, 2023. So if you understand Kristallnacht, that was the kind of the groundbreaking event that started the persecution of the Jewish people during World War II. Okay. So, so that actually says a lot. Okay. So it really kind of connects Biden to like Hitler. Um, and what was interesting too about this date, November 9, 2023, it was 7 years after Trump was announced the winner. Okay. And then we had Biden and his administration, they orchestrated a ceasefire to get hostages returned, which I call the covenant with many. I did a whole video on it. That was announced 11/21. It was voted in Israel. They voted for it 11/22. It started on 11/24, which was Kislev 11 on the Hebrew calendar, which is 9/11, the 9th month on the Hebrew calendar, the 11th day, which is Biden's birthday on the Hebrew calendar. So fascinating. Okay. A lot of connection with Biden and 11/9 or 9/11. That was also Black Friday, like the day after Thanksgiving, day 49 of the war. Which you see 7x7 with day 49. So then in December, Israel went back to fighting after the ceasefire on 12/1, which was Kislev 18 on the Hebrew calendar, which was 6 years after Trump's announcement about moving the embassy. So that was kind of interesting. And then also too, that 12/1 connects to that was, like a year after Netanyahu was in power. So it's interesting when we see kind of a repeat of dates, things happening on certain dates. Okay, we also saw Biden on 12/12/23, Biden was saying that Israel was doing indiscriminate bombing, which is a total lie. I mean, Israel's usually very precise in their bombing, okay? More than any other country in the world has ever done, okay? And, so, we see Biden doing saying blasphemous things against Israel, okay? So that was Kislev 29, and you could actually take Kislev 29 and turn that into 9/11, because it's 9/29 on the Hebrew calendar. You take the 29 and turn that into 11, okay? We saw Jake Sullivan did a speech at the American Embassy in Jerusalem saying Israel will move to another phase in the war. So Jake Sullivan was actually in Israel pushing this idea of moving to another phase. Okay, they were fighting intensely and they wanted them to mellow out with their fighting. Like, how do you fight against terrorists if you got to be a snowflake about it? Okay. And so that was 12/15/23, which was actually the 8th day of Hanukkah. Okay. I didn't put that in there for some reason. It was day 70 of the war, so I think that's a very significant day. So maybe this is the fullness of, like the 70th week, the fullness of Biden's sins. Okay. And then we saw Biden did a 45-minute phone call. The 45 is interesting, connects to Trump, being the 45th president. 45-minute phone call with Netanyahu to reinforce moving to the next phase in war, which occurred. Oh, the phone call occurred on 12/23/23, which was Tevet 11th, so kind of like a 10/11. Well, not kind of, it is a 10/11. So then on January 9th, we saw Blinken met with Netanyahu to pressure Israel into the two-state solution after the war. Okay, so I got an article on the next slide. I'm wondering if that's a picture of the beast with the 10 heads. So we got to look at that. Okay. State Department, Arab nations will partner with U.S. on Gaza if Israel gets on board. So everyone's talking about what's going to happen to Israel and Gaza after the war. Well, just let them fight the war. Let them eliminate Hamas. Okay, but they just won't, And so So, what this article says is Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has returned from a 7-day trip in the Middle East where he visited 9 countries to discuss the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas and the conflicts that threaten a wider regional war. According to a spokesperson, Matt Miller, the Arab nations are ready to partner with the U.S. on short term and long term solutions for Palestinians in Gaza, but only if Israel is willing to get on board. Okay, we traveled through to 9 countries and met with leaders in each of those and was able to secure agreements with all of these Arab partners as well as with Turkey that they were ready to have those conversations. They were ready to coordinate with the United States and they were ready to take real steps to improve the lives of the Palestinian people in Gaza and to look at how to rebuild Gaza and establish Palestinian led governance in Gaza. Miller told Andrea Mitchell of MSNBC. But they were only willing to do that if they had a partner on the other side in Israel and if Israel was ready to take real, concrete steps to establish an independent Palestinian state, Miller concluded. Blinken traveled to Turkey, Greece, Jordan, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Egypt, and the West Bank to continue diplomatic discussions as tensions in the region have spiked surrounding the Israel-Hamas war. Um, so, um, so we got 9 nations. If you include Turkey, that would make 10, or if you include the United States, that would make 10. So I'm wondering if this connects to the 10 horns of the beast from the sea. Okay. So they all want to pressure Israel into this 2-state solution. Okay, so they're taking advantage of the fact that now the general atmosphere is people are sort of against, not sort of, they're a lot against Israel because of this war in Gaza. Okay, I mean, Israel doesn't have a lot of friends. Okay, I mean, when you see these protests, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel protests, they're huge. There's a ton of people in them. Okay, so Israel has a lot of enemies. And so they want to put a lot of pressure on Israel to do this 2-state solution, which is it's just impossible. I mean, it would just mean the death of Israel. Okay. Because I mean, we already saw that with the Palestinians on the Gaza Strip. I mean, it was just nonstop bombing and rioting on the border. Okay, well, I mean, with this 2-state solution, you're going to have Palestinians all over the place. But I mean, God will never allow it to happen. Okay, you cannot divide Israel. Okay, God's going to step in. And so Blinken better be careful. Biden better be careful. These 9 countries better be careful because judgment's going to come. Okay, so like I said, I'm wondering if Biden is the beast from the sea with 10 heads. Okay, so it says in Revelation 13, I saw a beast coming out of the sea having 10 heads and 7 horns, and on his horn were 10 diadems, 10, which would be 10 crowns. Okay, so it means like 10 people in leadership. Okay, and on his heads were blasphemous names, and he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in Israel. I mean, those who dwell in heaven. Oh, that's funny that I said Israel because, I mean, that's what I think it is. You know, that Biden is blasphemy, how do you say that? Blaspheming against Israel. Okay. It was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome him, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. Now, this making war with the saints and overcoming them could be both a picture of overcoming the people in Israel, but also overcoming the Christians in America with this agenda, with this gay pride agenda, with his climate change agenda, just all the crazy stuff that they're doing in America, and also with the crazy open border stuff. Okay. And then all who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life. in the book of the life of the Lamb who has been slain. Okay, so all the people who are not Jesus followers are going to worship Biden. Um, so there's a bunch of people that worship him, and I'll show you this next slide coming up if you don't believe that people worship him. Okay. Um, I mean, all you got to do is find some videos of people on the left and how much they praise Biden. Okay, just think he's the greatest guy since sliced bread. Okay, so the 10 heads. Okay, is that the 9 Arab nations plus U.S. pushing Israel into a two-state solution? Okay, or like I said, it could be the 9 Arab nations plus Turkey pushing Israel into a two-state solution. And then the beast would be like the 11th would be America, Biden. Or it also, I mean, there could be a due fulfillment because we also have the 10 nations fighting with the Houthi rebels under the U.S. Task Force 153 in the Red Sea. That was announced by Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, on 12/18/23, after having a press conference in Tel Aviv with Gallant and mentioning the two-state solution in his press conference with Gallant. The reason why I bring that up is because exactly 2 weeks later, Austin was admitted into the hospital for complications after prostate surgery. Okay. So like I said, sometimes God's judgment is really fast on people. Okay. And I don't know, maybe Lloyd Austin is a believer, and so maybe this is a warning to him from God to like repent of pushing this two-state solution. I don't know. So we'll just have to see, how God's will plays out in his life. Okay. But you got to be careful if you're pushing the two-state solution. Okay. And then I'm wondering, I'm wondering if the 7 blasphemous names connect to 7 things that Biden did. So I was like, I took 4 of those items that we just went over and then added them to the 3 that I have on the left-hand side to maybe come up with 7. Okay. So 7 things that Biden did that was blasphemous against Israel. But then I've also connected the 7 heads to G7. Could also be connected to the 7 heads, because I think they were involved with the climate change. So the blasphemy could be, all the lies about climate change. Anyways, so that's what I got, so I'm really wondering, if we're at the fullness of the sins of Biden. Okay. Because I don't know how much more, he would be able to do. And I really think, especially because he's got all these nations wanting to push the two-state, I think his days are numbered. Okay, so here's the, on January 9th, we saw protesters outside Blinken's hotel in Israel. Okay. And, so I circled one of the banners. Okay, so I believe these are the families of the hostages, the Israeli hostages. And so for some reason, they're putting their hopes into Biden to bring home their family members. Okay, so this poster says, Biden, only you can save them. Okay, and I can't. Okay, so then it says like hashtag hostage deal now. Okay, I mean, so they were probably excited when Biden, worked out this first hostage deal, which got I think it was about 150 hostages came home that time, but we still have like 120 hostages left somewhere in Gaza, if they're still alive. I mean, that's always, a big wonder is if they're even still alive. And so for some reason they're putting their hope into Biden to save these hostages, and not looking to the Messiah to come. So we'll see what happens. So anyways, just if you think people don't worship Biden, they do. Okay. So this one, I kind of put Biden's 9/11 connections on here. His birthday on the Hebrew calendar. He was declared the winner 9 months, 11 days after the deal of the century. On 9/11/2023, he made a hostage deal with Iran and released $6 billion into the Iran economy, which we know goes straight to, um, terrorism. But I mean, that wasn't American money. It was money that I guess belonged to Iran. But still, we know that money goes straight into terrorism. 11/9 was, like I said, on Kristallnacht, was when Israel agreed to the 4-hour pauses. On 11/24 was when the ceasefire started, which was on Kislev 11, 9/11, Biden's birthday on the Hebrew calendar. And then 12/12, Biden accuses Israel of doing indiscriminate bombing on Kislev 29, which you could turn into a 9/11 if you add the 2 and the 9 of the 29. So the next 9/11 on the calendar is January 19, 2024. It is Shabbat 9 on the Hebrew calendar, which is the 11th month and the 9th day. So it's actually an 11/9, okay? Definitely a high watch date. What's interesting about January 19th is you could write 119 and you see can you see the hidden 9/11 in 119? Okay. First you see an 11 and you see a 9. Okay. So that's why that's a high watch date. I mean, at the very least, maybe Biden's going to do something really significant on that date. Which could be the total, like, fullness of his sins against Israel. Okay. But it could be when God brings judgment. I'm not sure. So, and then moving on to this year, 2024, year of the 8th king. Okay. So I have a picture of Trump on November 15th in 2022, when he announced his bid for president. So that was the other thing that happened in 2022, was Donald Trump announced his bid to be president. And what was interesting is that when he started out, he wrote, like on the banners, it would say text Trump to 88022. And which is interesting because you got the 8 and the 8. And then, like I said, 22 is like the 8th day. So it's like 888. So I thought that was interesting. And 2024 too is, 2 plus 2 plus 4 is 8. Okay. What's interesting about this picture here is there's 6 flags behind him, American flags. Oh, maybe there's some little ones back there too. Huh. But 6 big ones in the front row. So that's interesting. And then, okay, so then, like I said, in Revelation 17, we read about, the beast which was and is not, so the beast didn't have power. And then he's also an 8th and is of the 7, and he goes to destruction. Trump was the 6th king who returns to be the 8th king. So 2 plus 2 plus 4 equals 8, or 24, which is, 2024. You take the 24, also is either 888 or 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6. Okay, which this 4 6s could kind of be a picture of, like, the fullness of Trump's sins. Okay. Also, with the 8th day, it's the year of circumcision. Okay, on the Hebrew calendar, the day of circumcision. Where they circumcise the babies, and so it has to do with, like, removal of flesh. Okay. So something gets cut off on the 8th day. Okay. So are we going to see a type of fulfillment of flesh being cut off in the year of 2024? What's interesting about 2024 is that Matthew 24 is kind of one of the most important chapters in the Gospels, where Jesus tells us about the end times. Okay, so you know, so it's very interesting that that 24 number is there. Okay. Um, I said this before. Trump was the 45th president. If he returns, he'll be the 47th president, which would be another 9/11. Okay. Um, okay. What's interesting too is we see a connection with 22 connected to the war with Hamas. Okay. October 7th was Tishri 22 when the um, war started in Israel. The ground invasion started on day 22 of the war in Israel. And then Israel voted to accept the hostage deal on November 22nd. So remember, 22 connects to the number 8. Okay. So is God giving us a picture to look, at that number 8. Okay. Okay, and then what I thought was interesting, we had Winter Storm Finn. So the Weather Channel called it Winter Storm Finn over January 6th to January 7th weekend. Okay, that was the 6th named storm. So that was kind of interesting that happened over January 6th. Okay. And then we had Winter Storm Jerry, which quickly moved into Winter Storm Heather, happening over the Martin Luther King Jr. Day holiday weekend. Okay, those would be the 7th and the 8th named storms. Okay, so that was interesting to me, the number 7 and 8. What's interesting too is we've seen 9 weeks of rising COVID on January 13th. Okay, so I'm wondering if that, okay, so that has been since November 11th, which would be 2 days after November 9th, which was the start of the 4-hour pauses. Okay, so is the rising COVID connected to the fact that Biden was pushing Israel to start these pauses in the war? Okay, so part of that judgment, because if God sent COVID to judge Trump for doing the deal of the century, would we be seeing more COVID as judgment on Biden for his pressuring Israel during this war? Okay. I believe so. Okay. Well, we already kind of talked about this. So I don't know if I'll say much more about these verses. This is where Daniel has his messianic vision on the 24th day of the first month. Okay, we already talked about that date. I highlighted eyes, and then Daniel saw the vision, So like I said, maybe the return of Trump, one of the two witnesses. Okay, and then the word of the Lord came a second time to Haggai on the 24th day of the month, saying, "Speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, saying, I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth. I will overthrow the thrones of kingdoms and destroy the power of the kingdoms of the nations, and I will overthrow the chariots and their riders, and the horses and their riders will go down, every one by the sword of another." Okay, so I'm wondering if the fact that it's a second time connects to like the return of Trump. Okay, and then it was on the 24th day of the month. Does that 24 number connect to 2024? And then this verse 22, which I said connects to 8. And it says, "And the horses and their riders will go down, everyone by the sword of the other." So that's a picture of civil war. Okay. So definitely important verses. And then we also see in Zechariah on the 24th day of the 11th month, which is the month Shabbat in the 2nd year of Darius. Okay, so we're in the month of Shabbat on the Hebrew calendar right now. Okay, we see that 24 number. 11 also too connects to judgment. Okay, the 2nd year of Darius, like I said, that could be a picture of the return of Trump. Okay, and then we have the 4 horsemen. Okay, so Zechariah sees this vision of 4 horsemen, and the horsemen say, "We have patrolled the earth, and behold, all the earth is peaceful and quiet." Okay, well, what's interesting is, does that connect to, so we read about God says in his word that when they're saying peace and safety, then there be sudden destruction. So is this a picture of Biden and his followers saying, all the earth is peaceful and quiet because we have come up with this peace deal, okay, with Israel, okay? What's interesting is that the angel of the Lord says, O Lord of hosts, how long will you have no compassion for Jerusalem and the cities of Judah with which you have been indignant these 70 years? So we have a group of people saying everything's peaceful and quiet when we see the angels saying, okay, God is mad with Jerusalem and Judah. Okay, so there isn't peace and quiet. Okay. So the angel said, proclaim, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts, I am exceedingly jealous for Jerusalem and Zion, but I am very angry with the nations who are at ease. For while I was only a little angry, so God was only a little angry with Israel, but the nations have furthered the disaster. Then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, there were 4 horns. I said to the angel who was speaking with me, what are these? And he answered me, these are the horns which have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. Then the Lord showed me 4 craftsmen, and I said, what are these coming to do? These are the horns which have scattered Judah, so that no man lifts his head, but these craftsmen have come to terrify them, to throw down the horns of the nations who have lifted up their horns against the land of Judah in order to scatter it. So we're seeing 4 craftsmen are going to come to bring judgment to the horns that have scattered Judah. And so I put businessmen, could that connect to Trump's followers who are the businessmen? Okay. That's what I'm wondering about these verses. Okay. Oh, and I remember I'm going to go back here. See if I can find this. Let's see. Okay. Where so I'm going back to the slide. I talked about Austin being admitted in the hospital, but I didn't say too much about what we see is, so the United States got together with 9 other nations to fight with the Houthi rebels. Okay, so they're in Yemen, and they've been, lobbing missiles into the Red Sea, kind of in protest to the war in Gaza. Okay. Because, what's interesting is during this war, it's like America's been kind of in a kind of war too, because ever since October 17th, the terrorists in Syria and Iraq have been like bombing the bases that were the U.S. soldiers that are in Iraq and Syria that have been fighting against ISIS. Okay, but Biden has been fighting this really snowflake war, and once in a blue moon he'll do something to retaliate, but he's being really wimpy, which is making it more dangerous for American soldiers. Okay. And then now we have these 10 nations. Well, they announced 9 nations, but then there was more, and then there was less. So it's kind of hard to keep up with. And same thing, they're kind of going after the Houthi rebels, but it's still pretty suppressed. Okay. In Yemen. They're trying to keep the Red Sea open for shipping. Okay. So that's going on. Okay, so let's go back to where we were. Talked about that. Okay, so the high watch dates that I'm looking at are January 19th, 20th, and 21st. So like I said, there's 2 9/11 connections to January 19th. It is 3 years, like counting wise, over after Biden's inauguration. His inauguration happened on the 20th. So if you're going from date to date, the 3-year time frame, it would be January 20th. But if you're just counting days, it would end up on January 19th. So America's kind of been quote unquote at war since October 17th. So they've been at war for like 3 months plus 3 days. on January 19th, it'll be 3 months plus 3 days since October 17th. So I actually saw a video by a Jewish rabbi that talked about this Rome figure kind of having a 3 month war in the last days before the Messiah comes. Okay, so maybe it's connecting to the fact that America's kind of been at war in the Middle East since October 17th. We see, okay, so then Israel's been at war 3 months plus 13 days since October 7th. So almost, 3.5 months. Okay. And then January 19th is the third Christmas in Jerusalem. Okay. Jerusalem's probably the only city that has 3 Christmases, which is kind of funny that, in the Jewish state. January 20th. So then January 20th would be 3 months, 14 days since October 7th. So that's, definitely 3.5 months of war. Then, like I said, 3 years after Biden's inauguration by date. What's interesting about that is it's 1335 days from the start of the George Floyd riots. It's 62 days from Biden's birthday. Okay, so a lot of times on the 62 day, there's a change. Darius the Mede received the kingdom at 62. Okay, so that's why that's important. January 21st is 11/11 on the Hebrew calendar. And then that connects to 21 connects to the 777. So anyways, so this whole weekend is a high watch day. So we'll see what happens. And like I said, the third Christmas is January 19th. So Christmas on December 25th, and then Orthodox Christmas on January 9th. We're not all that happy of Christmases, okay? I actually heard about one family that had a very tragic event that happened on Christmas on the 25th, okay? And we've been under, tribulation here, and so Christmas, wasn't that exciting. It wasn't that bad, but it's not been one of my happiest Christmases. So I've been singing this song. Okay, it's the song Christmas Baby Please Come Home. Okay, I've been singing this in my head like kind of ever since Christmas, because it says they're singing Deck the Halls, but it's not like Christmas at all. And then I changed the words a little bit to make them fit for Jesus. And I said, because I remember when you were here and all the fun we had that year when Jesus was still around way back when. And then I said, if there was a way, I'd hold back this tear, but it's Christmas Day. Please, 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 Jesus, please come home. So I changed it to say, please, Jesus, come home. Okay. So that's what I've been singing, because I just, there was a lot of things that happened around Christmas on the 25th that weren't, obviously the war's been going on in Israel, so that's not that happy. There was actually a ship I think it's in the Red Sea, that they thought they would, one of the American ships that Biden had sent over there, they thought they would get sent home for Christmas, but Biden extended their time, so Christmas wasn't happy for those families. The military ship, American military ship in the Red Sea. So just a lot of events like that. I remember seeing that, like, Europe was under a terrorist warning for, the Christmas holidays. So just a lot of things that made it a really sober time. And so in Israel, so there's this one group, so the first Christmas is December 25th. The Orthodox celebrate Christmas January 7th. And then there's one last group in Israel that for some reason they celebrate Christmas on the 19th of January. It's an Armenian congregation in Israel, and so they actually have on the 18th they have I mean, they used to do a parade on the 18th, and then on the 19th is the Christmas, um, and so they've been doing this for years and years and years, and so I've always kind of wondered if that could be a significant date, it being the third Christmas. Okay, um, I found this article about December 25th. It said, with war raging in Gaza, Christmas is effectively canceled in Bethlehem. Um, and so that was actually like, it's not what you think. I mean, you would think, I've actually heard it two different ways, but this article actually talks about the fact that the Palestinian Christians canceled Christmas in Bethlehem in protest to the war in Gaza, um, which just like seems a whole lot of um, like it doesn't quite fit in my brain as really kind of working together. Because if they're really true Christians, how come they don't support Israel? But but I also heard it the other way too, that just because of the war, there's not a lot of tourists in Israel, and so Bethlehem, which is usually bustling with tourists, um, over Christmas, the Christmas holiday, people want to go celebrate Christmas in you know, the literal Bethlehem, um, was just empty this year. Just a very different tone. Okay. Um, and then I put this one picture, which is another picture, which is just like kind of bizarre mixing of truths or whatever. So it says the Christmas nativity scene at the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem this year. So what they have is the baby Jesus is like amid the rubble. So they're kind of making a parallel with Jesus and the Palestinians, and that doesn't really sit well with me, knowing that Jesus was Jewish. So just kind of a weird, bizarre. Although I went to, um, I think it was the Precious Moments museum, and they had all these different nativity scenes, and you saw how the different cultures really turned the nativity scene to fit a picture of their culture. Okay, so everyone likes to change the Jesus story to fit their culture. Okay, so that's what we got with the Palestinians here, making it seem like Jesus is in the rubble. Okay, but that is not like Christmas at all. That's not what happened with the nativity story in the Bible. Um, I mean, although you can say that Jesus connects to people's suffering, so, but I mean, I believe Jesus would be connecting to both. I mean, definitely the Jewish people's suffering, um, and then maybe some of the Palestinian suffering. But God knows who's his in those groups of people. Okay. Um, so, anyways, okay. So I wanted, so we see that we could kind of say, either January 19th or January 20th could be considered like a third day. So like I said, we have the third day of Christmas, but Biden's, 3-year anniversary after his inauguration could be considered a third day. Okay. And so we see a lot about the third day in scripture. Okay. In Exodus 19, God tells Moses to tell the people to be ready for the third day. And what's interesting about it, because then God says on the third day, the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. And then what's interesting is that God tells Moses to tell the people, beware that you do not go up on the mountain or touch the border of it. So what if the mountain is like a picture of Israel, and we have like Biden and all these other people wanting to touch the border of Israel? Okay. So God says beware. Okay. Because then what he says, let's see, whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through, whether beast or man, he shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain. Okay, So the ram's horn could definitely be a picture of the final trumpet, you know. Then in Luke, we read, and it happened that while he was praying alone, the disciples were with him, and he questioned them, saying, "Who do the people say that I am?" They answered and said, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, but others that one of the prophets of old has risen again." And he said to him, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered and said, "The Christ of God." But he warned them and he instructed them not to tell anyone, saying, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and be raised up on the third day." So we could see that the nation of Israel could be suffering the same fate as Jesus, rejected for 3 months and killed, quote unquote, where we had Israel sending the reservist home and going to a different phase of war with less violent fighting. Okay. But then it talks about, just as Jesus was raised up on the third day, we'll see Israel being raised up on the third day, is what I'm thinking. And then in Genesis 40, okay, so this is the baker and the cupbearer. Okay, so I think the cupbearer is a picture of Trump, and he gets to return, and he gets to put the cup in Pharaoh's hand. So we're going to have Trump return to put the cup of judgment into Biden's hand. Okay, and then the chief baker says, "I also saw my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. In the top basket there was all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Okay, so the 3 baskets could connect to the 3 years of Biden, where the third year there was war during the third year of Biden in Israel. Okay, and the baked foods for Pharaoh could be all these ideas that Biden cooked up for the Arab nations. Okay. Then Joseph answered and said, "This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you." Thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday. So that's why I'm looking at the 3-year anniversary of Biden's inauguration. Is that a type of birthday for Biden? And also that it's, January 19th is, has 2 9/11 connections, which also connects to Biden's birthday. Okay. That he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. Now, the first part of this might have actually already been fulfilled in the war. It started the war, and there was another thought that I had, but I can't remember now, of another possible fulfillment. But then it says he restored the cupbearer to his office. Trump returns, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer, that would be Trump, did not remember Joseph but forgot him. That would be like a picture of Trump forgetting Jesus, okay? Because he thinks he is Jesus, so. And then another picture, Hamor and Shechem. Okay, that would be a picture of Biden and Blinken. Came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, "These men are friendly with us, therefore let them live in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage and give our daughters to them. Only on this condition will the men consent us to live with us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised." So we have Hamor and Shechem are talking about like trading with the people, with Jacob and his family. Okay, so that can be a picture of Biden and Blinken talking to the 9 countries, saying, okay, let's make this deal with Israel. But the one condition is, circumcision, which is a picture of cutting, which would be a picture of dividing the land of Israel. Okay. So then, because they made this deal, it came about on the 3rd day when they were in pain, that 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came upon the city unawares and killed every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went forth. So Dinah, who's their sister, Simeon and Levi's, Jacob's daughter, could be a picture of America. Okay, so this would be a picture of like Trump's followers coming back to take America out of the hands of Biden. Okay, so another third day. Okay. Okay, so a lot of information. So like I said, I think this is the year of the eighth king. If we don't see it fulfilled, something happened this weekend, then I'll have to recalculate to figure out another like 3-year time frame. Maybe based on something that Biden did, in that first year, and then it'd be like 3 years later. But there's a lot of things kind of fitting together for this weekend. So I wanted to get this video out to you. But either way, I really think we're in the last days. I really think Jesus is at the door. Um, um, the fact that, it was interesting because I was listening to a couple of prophecy guys yesterday on YouTube, and they were all about like, well, there's some people that believe in pre-trib rapture, and then like a mid-trib rapture, and I just kind of roll my eyes because I don't know how they're missing that we're in tribulation now. I guess their life is going so well that they don't think they're in tribulation. But I definitely think, especially with the war in Israel, it's the time of Jacob's trouble. We're in tribulation now. And I don't really believe in the rapture per se. I believe in Jesus coming back. So I think we're in tribulation now. And I think we've been in tribulation, so like the time of Obama was like 8 years, and then with Trump you got 4, which is 12. And then the 3 years of Biden is 15. So it's almost been like a 15-year tribulation period. So I thought it was going to be shorter. I thought it was going to be 7 or 10 or 12, and then here we are at 15. So hopefully we'll be wrapping this up soon. So hopefully this was encouraging information. At the very least, I definitely know that we're going to see Trump return. I don't think we have to wait till the election. I don't think he's coming back that way. I think it's going to be a more violent way that he returns. Really, it's whenever God allows Trump to return. Whenever he lifts the head of the cupbearer and the baker, and he allows him to return, then we're going to see him return, and he's been itching to come back, so, and we've been at the brink of civil war for quite a while, and so it's almost like we're only one event or one word away from, the outbreak of the civil war. So we'll just see what happens. Another thing on Friday, I don't know if this would connect to it, but I think they're kind of having trouble coming up with a budget, and Fridays seem to be a significant date connected to that. But who knows? I don't know what that final straw that breaks the camel back, that sparks the, the final civil war. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens. So thanks for listening. I really appreciate you. And just hang in there. I pray for God's grace for you while you're waiting. Pray that God will guide you, during this time while we're waiting for the Messiah. And give you the grace to make it through, because I know times are hard right now. So hang in there. I appreciate you listening. God bless.